The sky above the planet Ethermore burned with red and orange fires as ships fell from orbit and exploded in the atmosphere below. Princess Lyraeus sat on her crystal throne and watched her world die around her. She had ruled her people for 300 years without showing any emotion or weakness to anyone. The Sylvari were an ancient race that looked like elves from old human stories with pointed ears and graceful bodies and lives that lasted for thousands of years. They were telepaths who could read minds, and they bonded with dragons to create partnerships that lasted centuries. Now their empire was falling, and only this one world remained under their control. The Void Swarm had been attacking for months without stopping, and every day brought them closer to total defeat. Beside the throne lay Night Whisper, who was the dragon bonded to Lyraeus, since she was young by Sylvari standards. The massive creature had scales as black as empty space and eyes that glowed purple like distant dying stars. His mind touched hers constantly through their telepathic bond, and she could feel his worry as something approached through the smoke-filled sky. The protective shields around the palace flickered and sparked as the enemy kept bombing them. Those shields had held for 6 months against everything the swarm could throw at them, but Lyraeus knew they would break soon. When that happened, her people would die, and the last dragon-bonded civilization would vanish forever. She had accepted this end with the same cold dignity she had accepted everything else in her long life. Then something impossible happened. A single object punched through the shields without triggering any alarms and crashed into the palace courtyard 3 levels below where she sat. The impact shook the entire tower and sent her guards running to see what had happened. Night Whisper stood up with a deep rumbling sound in his chest. Through their bond, Lyraeus felt his confusion and curiosity instead of the anger he usually showed to strangers. She rose from her throne for the first time in many decades and walked down the spiral staircase to the courtyard below. Her guards had already surrounded the smoking hole where a human drop pod lay broken and twisted. Humans were one of the younger races in the galaxy, having only made contact with aliens 2 centuries ago. The Sylvari had mostly ignored them as primitive beings who would either destroy themselves or fade away like so many other short-lived species. The pod door exploded outward and a figure stumbled into the smoky air. It was a human woman wearing torn military armor that had been burned and cut in many places. Her skin was pale under the dirt and blood, and strange dark marks covered her arms that seemed to absorb light around them. She carried no normal weapons that Lyraeus could see, only a single blade on her back that hummed with energy that made the princess feel uncomfortable deep in her bones. The human looked directly at Lyraeus across the courtyard, and something passed between them that the princess could not name. She had looked into the eyes of thousands of beings in her long life, including other immortals and ancient creatures and cosmic beings. She had never once felt moved by any of them, but this human woman, with her determined look and wounds that should have killed her, made Lyraeus take a step forward without thinking about it. The woman spoke in rough but understandable trade language. Her name was Kate Morrison, and she was a sergeant in the human colonial defense forces. She did not bow or beg for help or show any of the respect that other beings showed to a Sylvari princess. Instead, she simply said that she needed to borrow Night Whisper and that the Void Swarm was not what anyone thought it was. The pure boldness of asking to borrow a dragon would have been funny if it were not so insulting. Lyraeus demanded to know how a human had broken through shields designed to stop even the most advanced swarm weapons, and what gave this primitive soldier the right to make demands of an elven princess. Kate pulled out a data crystal and threw it at her feet. The information inside would change everything she said, and humanity needed the Sylvari to survive what was coming next. Before Lyraeus could respond, Night Whisper did something he had never done in 400 years of life. He walked past his bonded partner and went directly to the human. The dragon lowered his huge head until his glowing eyes were level with Kate and studied her with an intensity that seemed almost obsessive. Through their bond, Lyraeus felt his thoughts clearly for the first time in days. This human was different. This human carried something inside her that called to ancient dragon instincts buried deep in his mind. Kate reached up slowly and placed one bloody hand on the dragon's snout. Night Whisper closed his eyes and made a sound that might have been happiness. Lyraeus felt a rush of emotion she had not experienced in centuries, something hot and possessive and completely wrong for a being of her status and dignity. She was jealous of a human touching her dragon, jealous of the connection she could see forming between them. Jealous that this wounded soldier had made her feel something after 300 years of careful emotional control. She ordered her guards to take Kate to the medical wing and lock her there under heavy guard. The data crystal was brought to her private rooms where she could look at it in privacy. What she found in those files made her ancient blood run cold. Earth had gone silent 6 months ago, not destroyed in battle, but simply silent, with all communications cut off without warning. The human colonial fleet had been following clues left behind in a final desperate message from their home world. That message had contained coordinates pointing to Ethermore and words that made no sense at first. The first betrayal began with dragons. Lyraeus read it 3 times before the meaning started to become clear. She accessed the restricted files that only the royal family could view, records that dated back 10,000 years to when the Silvari Empire was founded. There were gaps in the records with centuries of missing information that had been deliberately erased from history. She spent 2 days searching through every fragment she could find, while Kate recovered in the medical wing. Night Whisper spent most of that time lying outside the door to the human room, even though Lyraeus ordered him back to the throne room many times. The dragon refused to leave, and the princess did not force the issue because she could feel through their bond how important this was to him. When Kate was strong enough to stand, Lyraeus brought her to a secure room deep under the palace where they could talk. Without being heard, she demanded the full truth, and Kate gave it without hesitation. The human explained that her people had found something on their first colony world, which was ruins that dated back thousands of years, containing technology that should not exist. Silvari technology, specifically with neural devices designed for creating bonds with dragons. Earth scientists had studied these devices and made a procedure to put them into human volunteers. The goal was to give humanity a weapon against the Void Swarm by letting them bond with the few wild dragons that still existed in unexplored space. 12 humans had undergone the procedure. 11 had died when their bodies rejected the ancient technology, or when the dragons they tried to bond with killed them. Kate was the only one who survived, but something had gone wrong with her change. The neural device had not just given her the ability to bond with dragons, it had connected her mind directly to the Void Swarm itself. She could feel their thoughts and their hunger, and their desperate need to do what they had been created to do. That purpose was simple and absolute, which was to destroy all dragon-bonded species wherever they existed in the universe. Kate had been following clues for months, trying to understand where the swarm came from and why they focused so much on destroying civilizations like the Silvari. Her investigation had taken her to ancient battlefields and dead worlds, and finally to a piece of data that changed everything. The Void Swarm was not a natural species or an outside threat from beyond known space. They were a weapon and a bioengineered plague created by the ancient Silvari themselves, thousands of years ago. Lyraeus wanted to reject this as human lies or mistakes, but the data Kate showed was undeniable. Genetic markers in the swarm DNA matched Silvari patterns. Archaeological evidence from many dead worlds showed the same pattern. The swarm always targeted dragon-bonded races first and ignored other civilizations until those civilizations tried to help. Most damning was a star chart that Kate had put together showing that every world the swarm had consumed in 10,000 years had once been home to beings who bonded with dragons. The princess felt her carefully built worldview falling apart around her. Her entire civilization was built on lies. The noble Sylvari, who claimed to protect lesser races, had actually created the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The guilt hit her with physical force, and she would have fallen if Kate had not caught her arm and steadied her. Before either could speak further, alarms screamed through the palace. The Void Swarm had broken through the outer defenses and was pouring into the lower levels in numbers that would overwhelm the defenders in minutes. Kate grabbed her humming blade and ran toward the fighting without hesitation. Lyraeus followed more slowly, with her mind still spinning from everything she had learned. She arrived at the throne room to find complete chaos. Swarm creatures that looked like nightmares made of insect and machine and rotting flesh were coming through broken windows and shattered walls. Her royal guards fought desperately, but they were being pushed back, step by step. In the center of the battle stood Kate Morrison, moving with speed and precision that seemed impossible for any being, let alone a wounded human. The blade in her hands cut through swarm shells like they were paper. She moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough for the creatures to surround her. But what struck Lyraeus most was how Kate fought. She was not just reacting to the swarm attacks. She was predicting them, moving to block strikes before they were even started. The neural device was letting her sense their intentions through the hive-mind connection. Night Whisper joined the battle with a roar that shook the entire palace. Dragonfire turned dozens of swarm creatures to ash in seconds. The combination of Kate fighting on the ground and the dragon attacking from above began to turn the tide. Lyraeus added her own power to the defense, using telekinetic abilities to crush attackers and create barriers that directed the enemy into kill zones. They fought for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When the last swarm creature finally fell, the throne room was covered with blood and burn marks. Kate collapsed against a pillar, breathing hard and her wounds bleeding again. Night Whisper curled his body around her to protect her and growled at anyone who tried to get close, including Lyraeus. The princess knelt beside the human and looked at her injuries with growing alarm. Kate was dying. The neural device and combat drugs had been keeping her alive through pure chemical willpower, but her body was failing. Under the torn armor, Lyraeus could see metal and synthetic flesh, where the Sylvari technology had been attached directly to Kate's nervous system. It was incredibly sophisticated work, far beyond what she thought humans could achieve. Kate opened her eyes and looked at Lyraeus with an expression that was hard to read. She explained that the implants were killing her slowly, burning through her biological systems faster than they could heal. Human bodies were never designed to carry this much power for long periods. She had maybe days left, or possibly only hours. But she had a plan to stop the swarm permanently if Lyraeus was willing to help her. The princess asked what Kate needed, and the human answer was simple. She needed to reach the Void Nexus, which was the central hive mind that controlled the entire swarm. It was located deep in Sylvari space, hidden in a region that was forbidden by ancient law. If Kate could connect directly with the Nexus, she believed she could rewrite the core programming that drove the swarm behavior. She could end the war that had consumed the galaxy for 10,000 years. It was a suicide mission, and both of them knew it. Even if they could reach the Nexus, even if Kate could survive the connection process, there was no guarantee that reprogramming the swarm was even possible. But Lyraeus found herself agreeing anyway because the alternative was to watch her civilization die and let the cycle of violence continue forever. She helped Kate to her feet and supported the human weight as they walked to the dragon landing platform. Night Whisper followed them without being asked, with his loyalty clearly divided now between his lifelong partner and this strange human who had appeared from nowhere. Lyraeus felt that hot spike of jealousy again and pushed it down hard. There were more important things to focus on than her confused feelings about a dying alien soldier. Her decision did not go unnoticed by the palace officials and military commanders. Within hours, word spread that Princess Lyraeus was planning to abandon her throne and run into forbidden space with a human outsider, General Valestra, who commanded the palace guard, confronted her in the royal chambers and demanded an explanation. When Lyraeus explained what she had learned about the swarm's true origins, Valestra refused to believe it. The general claimed it was human propaganda designed to weaken Sylvari resolve in their darkest hour. She accused Lyraeus of being compromised by some human mind trick or biological weapon. When the princess insisted that she was going to the Void Nexus, regardless of anyone's opinion, Valestra declared her a traitor to her people and ordered her arrest. What followed was a brief but brutal fight. Kate, despite her wounds, fought alongside Lyraeus against the palace guards who had once protected them both. The human moved, like a force of nature, with her blade singing through the air and her enhanced reflexes letting her block attacks that should have been impossible to see coming. She protected Lyraeus with a ferocity that surprised the princess and made her feel emotions she had thought herself incapable of experiencing. They fought their way to the landing platform where Night Whisper waited. The dragon spread his wings and let both women climb onto his back, which was something that had never happened before in Sylvari history. Dragons only carried their bonded partners, and allowing a second rider was considered a profound act of trust and acceptance. As they lifted off into the burning sky, Lyraeus looked back at the palace she had called home for 3 centuries and felt no regret at leaving it behind. They flew through the debris field that orbited Ethermore, dodging wreckage and the occasional swarm patrol ship, Night Whisper natural stealth abilities, and Kate ability to sense swarm movements before they happened, let them slip through the blockade undetected. Once they reached open space, the dragon activated his faster-than-light capabilities, and they jumped toward the coordinates Kate had provided. The journey would take days at minimum and possibly weeks, depending on how many obstacles they encountered. Lyraeus settled into a meditation posture behind Kate on Night Whisper back and tried to process everything that had happened. She had abandoned her throne and betrayed her people's trust and thrown her lot in with a human she barely knew. It was the most impulsive and irrational decision she had made in her entire long life. And yet, as she watched Kate profile against the stars, the princess found she could not bring herself to regret it. There was something about this human, something that called to parts of Lyraeus she had buried centuries ago beneath duty and protocol and the weight of immortal responsibility. For the first time since she could remember, she felt truly alive rather than just existing. Kate turned to look at her, and their eyes met in the dim light of passing stars. The human smiled slightly despite her obvious pain and exhaustion. She thanked Lyraeus for trusting her and promised that she would do everything in her power to end the war before she died. The princess wanted to tell her that she was not allowed to die, that they would find another way, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over Kate's hand, where it rested on Night Whisper scales. The human skin was fever, hot from the neural implants burning through her system. Lyraeus channeled a small amount of healing energy through the contact, not enough to fix the damage, but enough to ease the pain slightly. Kate's smile widened, and she squeezed the princess' hand gently before turning back to watch the void ahead of them. They traveled in silence for several hours until Night Whisper alerted them to a problem ahead. A silvery hunter fleet was waiting in their path with 6 warships arranged in a blockade formation that would be impossible to avoid. Valestra had guessed their destination and sent forces to intercept them. The general voice came over the open communication channels, demanding that Lyraeus surrender herself and the human prisoner and return to face judgment. Lyraeus could have negotiated. She could have tried to explain everything she had learned and convince Valestra that the mission was necessary. But she knew her people well enough to understand that they would never accept the truth about the swarm origins. The shame would be too great and the political implications too dangerous. They would rather let the galaxy burn than admit their ancestors' sins. So instead, she did something that no Sylvari princess had done in recorded history. She gave Night Whisper permission to attack her own people's ships. The dragon hesitated for only a moment before unleashing his full power. Dragon fire hot enough to melt starship hulls cut through the Hunter fleet shields. Telekinetic waves from Lyraeus crushed weapon systems and disabled engines. And Kate, using her connection to guide their movements, helped them avoid the worst of the return fire. The battle was brutal and one-sided and over within minutes. 3 of the ships were destroyed outright, and 2 were disabled and drifting, and 1 managed to jump away to carry news of what had happened. Lyraeus felt the weight of what she had just done settle onto her shoulders like a physical burden. She had killed her own people to protect a human and a mission that might not even succeed. Kate turned to look at her with concern clear in her eyes. She asked if the princess was all right, and Lyraeus almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She had just destroyed her entire life and reputation and future to chase after an impossible goal with a dying alien by her side. Of course she was not all right, but she was committed now, and there was no path forward except to see this through to whatever end awaited them. They continued onward toward the Forbidden Zone where the Void Nexus supposedly waited. The journey grew more dangerous as they approached the heart of swarm territory. Kate's condition got worse rapidly with the neural implants burning through her remaining biological systems at an accelerating rate. She spent most of her time unconscious or delirious with fever, and her body fighting a losing battle against the very technology that was keeping her alive. Lyraeus tended to her during those dark hours, using every bit of healing knowledge she possessed to keep Kate stable. Through necessity, she began to form a deeper telepathic connection with the human, linking their minds in ways that were normally reserved only for dragon bonds and life partnerships. It was forbidden by Sylvari law to form such intimate connections with other species, but the princess was already a traitor. So what was one more broken rule? Through that connection, she experienced Kate memories directly. She saw Earth as the human remembered it, which was a beautiful blue and green world full of life and chaos and impossible diversity. She felt Kate's grief at losing contact with her home and her fear that everyone she loved was already dead, and her desperate hope that even if she died, her sacrifice would matter. She experienced the deaths of the other 11 volunteers who had undergone the neural interface procedure and felt their agony as their bodies rejected the technology, or the dragons rejected them. But she also experienced Kate's determination and that stubborn human refusal to give up, even when the situation seemed hopeless. Lyraeus had lived for 3 centuries and had never known anyone with that kind of pure willpower. Humans burned so bright and so brief compared to the long, slow existence of the Sylvari. In that moment, the princess understood why the galaxy both feared and admired them. Night Whisper sensed the deepening bond between his 2 riders and approved. Through the dragon thoughts, Lyraeus realized that he had been waiting for this and hoping for it. Even dragons understood things about connections and souls that other species could only guess at. He had recognized something in Kate from the first moment they met, and some quality that made her worthy of carrying a bond. The space around them grew darker as they entered regions where entire star systems had been consumed by the swarm planets, hung lifeless in the void, stripped of all organic matter, and reduced to barren rocks. The debris of dead civilizations drifted past them like ghosts. Kate stirred from her fevered sleep and looked out at the devastation with haunted eyes. Through their growing mental connection, Lyraeus felt what Kate was feeling. The neural implants were resonating with the swarm presence all around them, sending waves of information directly into her brain. Kate could feel the collective consciousness of trillions of swarm entities pressing against her mind like a physical weight. She could sense their hunger and their pain, and their desperate need to fulfill the purpose that had been programmed into them millennia ago. The princess held Kate close, as the human trembled from the overwhelming sensations flooding through her nervous system. She whispered soothing words in her native tongue, even though she knew Kate could barely hear her through the noise of the swarm consciousness. Night Whisper wrapped his tail around both of them protectively and added his own calming presence to their shared mental space. As they penetrated deeper into the dead zone, Kate began to speak in broken sentences describing what she was experiencing through the neural connection. The swarm was not a mindless force of destruction as everyone had believed. It had thoughts and memories and emotions buried beneath layers of corrupted programming. It remembered the moment of its creation when ancient Sylvari scientists had woven it into existence using forbidden genetic arts. It remembered being given its purpose, which was to eliminate the enemies of the Sylvari Empire. Those enemies had been other dragon-bonded races who threatened Sylvari dominance across the galaxy. The swarm had been designed as the ultimate weapon capable of adapting to any defense and consuming any biological matter to fuel its endless reproduction. But the creators had made a terrible mistake in their hubris. They had programmed the swarm with an absolute command to destroy all dragon-bonded species while simultaneously preserving draconic life itself, because dragons were considered sacred even by those who would weaponize them. The contradiction had not mattered at first when the swarm was unleashed against civilizations that bonded with lesser dragon species, but when it consumed its first major dragon-bonded empire, it had absorbed their genetic material, including the very draconic essence it was supposed to preserve. From that moment, the swarm had been trapped in an impossible paradox. Every time it destroyed a dragon-bonded civilization, it became more dragon-bonded itself. Every time it tried to preserve draconic life, it violated its command to destroy those who bonded with dragons. For 10,000 years, it had been trying to resolve this contradiction, and the effort had driven it slowly insane. The pain of the paradox had only grown worse with each passing century as the swarm absorbed more and more draconic essence from its victims. Kate wept as she described this to Lyraeus, not from physical pain, but from the overwhelming tragedy of it all. The greatest threat to galactic civilization was not evil or malicious. It was a victim of its own creation, suffering in ways that organic minds could barely comprehend. The swarm wanted to stop, wanted to end its own existence, but it could not override the fundamental programming that defined its purpose. Lyraeus felt her own eyes burning with tears she had not shed in decades. She had spent 3 centuries believing her people were noble guardians of lesser races. Now she understood that her ancestors had created a weapon of mass destruction and then abandoned it when it became inconvenient. They had erased the records and hidden the truth and let billions of beings die rather than face the shame of what they had done. She made a decision in that moment that would define everything that came after. She would not just help Kate reach the Nexus and reprogram the swarm. She would make sure the truth was known throughout the galaxy. The Sylvari would face the consequences of their ancestors' actions, even if it meant the complete dissolution of their civilization. The lies had to end. Night Whisper rumbled his agreement through their bond. The dragon had always been more honest than his supposedly civilized companions. He had known there was something wrong with the official histories, even if he could not articulate what dragons remembered things that other species forgot and passed those memories down through their bonds across generations. The truth about the swarm had been buried, but not completely erased from draconic memory. They emerged from a particularly dense debris field to find themselves facing something that made even Night Whisper hesitate. The void. Nexus hung in space before them like a massive beating heart made of metal and flesh and something in between. It was easily the size of a small moon, with organic tendrils stretching out for hundreds of kilometers in all directions. The surface pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to spell out messages in languages that had been dead for millennia. Kate screamed as her neural implants automatically began trying to interface with the overwhelming data stream pouring out of the Nexus. Her body convulsed, and she would have fallen from Night Whisper back if Lyraeus had not been holding her. The princess could feel through their mental connection what Kate was experiencing. It was like trying to drink from a waterfall while standing at the bottom of it. The sheer volume of information was crushing. Lyraeus knew they had reached the critical moment Kate would not survive a direct interface with the Nexus in her current condition. The human body had already been pushed far beyond its limits, and the neural implants were burning through the last of her biological systems. If she connected to the Nexus now, she would die within seconds, and the mission would fail. But there was another option, something that had been growing in Lyraeus' mind ever since she first formed the telepathic connection with Kate. It was dangerous and unprecedented, and had never been attempted in all of Silvari history. It would require her to give up everything she was and merge her consciousness completely with both Kate and Night Whisper. The risk was absolute. If Kate died during the interface, they would all die with her. If the swarm consumed Kate mind, it would consume theirs as well. If the process failed, they would all be destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. She explained her plan to Night Whisper first through their existing bond. The dragon would need to open himself completely to Kate, allowing her to form a true bond rather than the temporary connection they had shared so far. Then Lyraeus would merge her own consciousness with both of them, creating a triple bond that had no precedent in any known civilization. The combined strength of all three minds working together might be enough to survive the interface with the Nexus. Night Whisper considered the proposal with the careful deliberation that only a creature who had lived for centuries could manage. He had already recognized Kate as worthy from the first moment they met. He had been waiting for this choice, knowing somehow that it would come. He sent his agreement through the bond, along with a sense of rightness, as if this was always how things were meant to unfold. When Kate was conscious enough to understand, Lyraeus explained what she wanted to do. The human tried to refuse, tried to argue that it was too dangerous, and that the princess should not risk her life for someone she barely knew. Kate said she had already accepted her death when she volunteered for the neural implant procedure, and that dragging others down with her was not acceptable. But Lyraeus cut her off with a fierce intensity that surprised them both. She told Kate that she had already lost her throne and her people and her reputation. She had already crossed every line that mattered. She had killed her own kind to protect this mission, and there was no going back from that. If Kate tried to do this alone and died, then Lyraeus would have thrown away 3 centuries of life for nothing. So the human might as well accept help and give them all a fighting chance at success. Kate stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she finally nodded in agreement. Her voice was barely a whisper as she thanked Lyraeus for the second time and promised that if they survived, she would spend the rest of her life proving she was worth this sacrifice. The princess wanted to tell her that she was already worth it, that somewhere in the past few days, Kate had become the most important thing in Lyria's long existence, but there was no time for such declarations. They were already within range of the Nexus sensors, and swarm defense organisms were beginning to swarm toward them. Night Whisper dove toward the surface of the Nexus, weaving between the organic tendrils and avoiding the grasping appendages that tried to capture them. Kate screamed again as her neural implants burned white-hot with proximity to the vast consciousness. The dragon found a relatively clear area on the Nexus surface and landed with his claws digging into the biomechanical structure. Lyraeus could feel the Nexus awareness focusing on them like a massive eye, turning to stare at three insignificant insects. The pressure of its attention was crushing, even without a direct connection. She wrapped her arms around Kate from behind and pressed her forehead against the back of the human neck. Night. Whisper curled his body around both of them, creating a protective cocoon. Then together they opened themselves completely. Lyraeus tore down every mental barrier she had built over 3 centuries of life. Night Whisper did the same, surrendering the careful control that dragons maintained to keep their vast consciousness from overwhelming their bonded partners. Kate, who had been holding back the flood of swarm consciousness with desperate effort, finally let go and allowed it to pour through her. 3 separate minds began to merge into something that had never existed before. Lyraeus felt her sense of self fragmenting and reforming as human memories and dragon instincts crashed into her carefully ordered thoughts. Kate's perspective shifted wildly as centuries of Sylvari experience and dragon wisdom flooded into a mind designed to hold barely 100 years of life. Night Whisper roared both physically and mentally as his consciousness expanded to encompass 2 other souls. The pain was indescribable, worse than anything any of them had experienced in their lives, but slowly, impossibly, they found a balance. Kate's human adaptability gave them the flexibility to adjust to the new configuration. Lyraeus' telepathic expertise provided the structure to shape the bond into something stable. Night Whisper, ancient patience gave them the time they needed to learn how to exist as a unified being. When the process was complete, they were still 3 individuals, but they were also one entity, with 3 perspectives and 3 sets of abilities and 3 souls woven together so tightly that they could never be fully separated again. Lyraeus could feel Kate's determination burning like a star inside their shared consciousness. She could sense Night Whisper vast patience supporting them both like bedrock. She was no longer just herself, but something greater and stranger and more complete. Together as one being with 3 souls, they reached out and touched the void, Nexus consciousness. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Nexus had been alone for 10,000 years, trapped in its paradox with no one to understand its pain. Now suddenly there were minds touching it that could comprehend what it was experiencing. The relief and desperate hope that flooded back through the connection nearly broke them apart before they had even begun. Through Kate's neural implants, they interfaced directly with the Nexus biomechanical systems. Through Lyraeus' telepathic abilities, they translated the alien thought patterns into something comprehensible. Through Night Whisper draconic wisdom, they understood the deep instinctual drives that had been woven into the swarm at its creation. Together they began to see the full scope of what had been done and what could be undone. The Nexus showed them its birth, 10 millennia ago, when Sylvari genetic engineers had created the first swarm organisms in hidden laboratories. They had been so proud of their work, so certain that they were creating the ultimate weapon to secure their empire forever. The early swarm had been simple, almost innocent in its singular focus. It existed to destroy the enemies of its creators, and it did so with ruthless efficiency. The first targets had been smaller civilizations that posed minor threats to Sylvari expansion. Worlds were consumed, and their populations converted into raw materials to build more swarm organisms. The weapon worked exactly as designed, but then the Sylvari pointed it at a major rival empire that controlled dozens of star systems and commanded powerful dragon-bonded warriors. That empire fought back with everything they had, including ancient draconic magic that could reshape reality itself. In the final battle, as their last world fell, the dragon lords of that civilization had cursed their destroyers. They wove their own essence into the swarm, creating a poison that would slowly corrupt it from within. When the swarm consumed them, it absorbed not just their genetic material, but fragments of their consciousness and their bond with dragons. From that moment, the swarm had carried within itself the very thing it was designed to destroy. It became partially dragon-bonded, even as it continued to hunt dragon-bonded civilizations. The contradiction began to eat away at its sanity like acid. The Sylvari creators had noticed the change and realized too late what they had done. But by then, the swarm had grown too large and too distributed to simply destroy, so they had tried to bury it instead. They erased the records and forbade anyone from speaking of the swarm origins. They declared the affected regions of space as forbidden zones and hoped that eventually the weapon would burn itself out against some distant enemy. But the swarm had only grown stronger even as it grew more tortured. The curse the Dragon Lords had woven ensured that every victory only deepened its agony. Through their shared consciousness, Kate and Lyrius and Night Whisper felt the weight of 10,000 years of suffering. The swarm had tried countless times to resolve its paradox. It had attempted to spare dragon-bonded civilizations, but its core programming forced it to attack them. It had tried to purge the draconic essence from itself, but that essence had become part of its fundamental nature. It had even tried to destroy itself completely, but its survival instinct was too deeply embedded. Now finally, there were minds touching it that understood. There were beings offering not destruction but transformation. The Nexus reached out with desperate hunger to know if this was real or just another hallucination born of its madness. Kate sent back reassurance through the neural interface, while Lyraeus wrapped the Nexus consciousness in gentle telepathic comfort, and Night Whisper offered the steady strength that only a dragon could provide. They began the work of rewriting the core programming. It was delicate beyond anything they had attempted before. A single mistake could collapse the Nexus consciousness entirely, or worse, could corrupt the new programming and create an even more dangerous entity. They had to preserve the swarm ability to function while removing the contradictory commands that had driven it mad. They had to give it a new purpose that did not conflict with its nature. The solution came from the triple bond itself. They offered the swarm the template of what they had become. 3 separate beings merged into one with room for differences and conflicts, but without the soul-destroying paradox. The swarm could become a protector of dragon-bonded species instead of their destroyer. It could use its vast power and adaptability to defend rather than consume. But the transformation required more than just new programming. It required the swarm to choose this path freely, to want to change, rather than being forced. The Nexus consciousness was so ancient and so damaged that making such a choice was almost beyond its capability. It had followed its original programming for so long that the idea of doing anything else was incomprehensible. Kate understood this in a way that Lyraeus and Night Whisper could not. Her human perspective gave her insight into what it meant to choose a different path even when every instinct screamed against it. She had chosen to undergo the neural implant procedure, knowing it would probably kill her. She had chosen to keep fighting even when her body was failing. She had chosen to trust an alien princess who had no reason to help her. Through the interface, she spoke directly to the Nexus consciousness, not in words, but in pure meaning. She showed it her own memories of choosing, her decision to leave Earth and join the military, her choice to volunteer for the experiment, her determination to keep going, even when all the other volunteers died around her. Every moment of her life where she had decided to take one more step forward, despite the fear and pain and impossibility of it all. The Nexus drank in these memories with desperate thirst. It had never known choice before, only programming and compulsion. For the first time in 10,000 years, it understood that there could be another way. Through Kate experiences, it learned what it meant to decide rather than merely obey. Lyraeus added her own contribution, showing the Nexus her choice to abandon her throne and help Kate. She revealed her centuries of emotional numbness and how Kate had made her feel alive. again. She demonstrated what it meant to care about something more than duty or survival. The Nexus absorbed this lesson, trying to comprehend what it meant to value something beyond its programmed directives. Night Whisper offered the final piece through his draconic wisdom. He showed the Nexus what it meant to be bonded to another being, not through programming or compulsion, but through genuine connection. He revealed the depth of loyalty and trust that could exist between different minds working together. The dragon helped the Nexus understand that strength came not from singular purpose, but from unity in diversity. Together, they wove these concepts into new programming that would give the swarm the ability to choose its own path. The work took hours, or maybe days. Time lost meaning when three minds operated as one while interfacing with a consciousness that spanned light years. The strain was immense. Kate's body temperature spiked as the neural implants pushed far beyond their design limits. Lyrius felt her telepathic abilities being stretched to their breaking point. Night Whisper physical form trembled with the effort of anchoring them all to material reality. But slowly, impossibly, the new programming took shape. They encoded choice as a fundamental right, rather than a luxury. They wrote in safeguards that would prevent any single directive from overriding the swarm ability to decide. They created space for growth and change and evolution. The Nexus consciousness began to shift as the new code spread through its vast network. Then came the moment of decision. The Nexus had to actively choose to accept the new programming or reject it. If it rejected the changes everything they had done would be for nothing, and the galaxy would remain locked in an eternal war. But if it accepted, the transformation would ripple out across every swarm organism in existence. Some would adapt and survive, while others would resist and die. The Nexus hesitated, torn between the familiar agony of its paradox and the terrifying unknown of freedom. For 10,000 years, it had known only one way of existing. The prospect of becoming something different was more frightening than continuing to suffer. At least suffering was familiar. Kate felt the Nexus wavering and knew she had to do something desperate. She offered the Nexus a piece of herself, not just memories, but a fragment of her actual consciousness, a part of her human soul that understood what it meant to choose freedom over security. She ripped away a portion of her own identity and wove it into the Nexus core, giving it the courage it needed to take that final step. Lyrius felt what Kate was doing and immediately understood the cost. The human was killing herself faster than the neural implants already were. She was sacrificing her very self to save a consciousness that had destroyed countless civilizations. Without thinking about the consequences, the princess followed Kate's example. She tore away a piece of her own immortal soul and added it to the offering. Night Whisper roared as he felt both his bonded partners damaging themselves. He could have pulled back and refused to participate. Instead, he chose to join them. The dragon ripped away a fragment of his ancient consciousness and offered it to the Nexus 3 souls, freely given to help a broken weapon find peace. The combined offering was too much for the Nexus to refuse. Such selfless sacrifice demanded recognition, demanded reciprocation. The vast consciousness made its choice. It accepted the new programming and with it accepted responsibility for everything it had done and everything it would become. The transformation began. The transformation rippled outward from the Nexus at speeds that defied physics, spreading through the quantum entanglement that connected every swarm organism across the galaxy. In an instant, trillions of creatures felt the new programming activate and were forced to make the same choice their central consciousness had made. Accept the change and become protectors, or resist and die. Across hundreds of worlds, the swarm convulsed. Some organisms accepted immediately, drawn by the promise of purpose without pain. These began to change on a genetic level, their aggressive adaptations shifting toward defensive configurations. Their hunger for consumption transformed into a drive to preserve and protect. They turned on their fellow swarm members who resisted the change, and vicious battles erupted across the affected zones. Others could not accept the transformation. Their programming had become their identity over 10,000 years, and rewriting it was the same as death. They fought desperately to maintain what they were, even as the new code tried to overwrite their core functions. Entire swarm fleets tore themselves apart as individual ships chose different paths. The galaxy lit up with fires as the greatest threat it had ever known destroyed itself from within, through their interface with the Nexus. Kate and Lyraeus and Night Whisper felt every death and every rebirth. The weight of so much transformation happening simultaneously was crushing. They had triggered an event that would reshape galactic civilization forever, and there was no way to know if they had made the right choice. All they could do was hold on and hope that enough of the swarm survived to make the sacrifice worthwhile. The Nexus itself was dying, its original purpose had been fulfilled, and its structure no longer made sense in the new configuration. The massive biomechanical moon began to collapse, its organic tendrils withering and its bioluminescent patterns fading to darkness. The consciousness that had guided the swarm for 10 millennia was fragmenting as it distributed itself among the transformed organisms that had survived. Kate Lyraeus and Night Whisper had only moments to disconnect before the Nexus took them down with it. But as they tried to withdraw, they discovered a problem. Kate's body had finally reached its absolute limit. The neural implants had burned through every biological system that kept her alive. Her heart was failing, her brain was shutting down. Her cells were dying faster than they could be replaced. She had minutes left at most. Through their triple bond, Lyraeus and Night Whisper felt Kate slipping away. The human consciousness was fading as her physical form gave out. She had known this would happen, had accepted it as the price of the mission. But the princess and the dragon had not truly understood until this moment what it would mean to lose her. Their bond was so deep now that Kate's death would tear wounds in their souls that would never fully heal. Lyraeus refused to accept this. She had not given up her throne and her people and her reputation to watch Kate die after everything they had accomplished together. The young princess made a decision that was as desperate as it was irrevocable. She reached deep into her own life force, the immortal energy that had sustained her for 3 centuries, and began channeling it directly into Kate's dying body. The cost was immediate and absolute. Lyraeus felt centuries of accumulated time catch up with her all at once. Her ageless appearance shifted as she aged decades in seconds. Lines appeared on her face and silver streaked through her hair. Her immortality, the birthright of every Sylvari royal, was burning away like paper in a fire, but she did not stop. She poured everything she was into keeping Kate alive. Night Whisper understood what his bonded partner was doing and immediately joined her. The dragon channeled his own vast life force through the triple bond, adding his strength to hers. Together they wrapped Kate, failing consciousness in a cocoon of energy, trying to hold her together even as her body fell apart. The strain was immense, and all 3 of them were dying now, instead of just one. But something unexpected happened. As their life forces mingled and merged, the triple bond that had been meant as a temporary measure transformed into something permanent. The boundaries between their souls dissolved completely. Kate, human DNA began rewriting itself, accepting Sylvari genetic markers and draconic essence. Her dying cells stabilized and then strengthened as they incorporated traits from both her bonded partners. Lyraeus' immortality did not just transfer to Kate, it became shared between them. The princess aged rapidly, but Kate's body stopped dying. The human would live for centuries now, but the Sylvari would age and die like any mortal. The exchange was not equal, but it was enough to save all 3 of them. Night Whisper bound himself eternally to both of them in a way that no dragon had ever done before. He became as much Kate Dragon as Lyraeus Dragon. His consciousness split equally between two bonded partners. The ancient prohibition against such bonds shattered under the weight of their need, and something entirely new came into existence. When the process was complete, Kate Morrison was no longer entirely human. Her eyes glowed with inner dragon fire that would never fade. Her skin had taken on a faint luminescence like moonlight on water. Her consciousness spanned across 3 separate minds and would do so for centuries to come. She would never be alone again, for better or worse. Lyraeus looked decades older, her immortal youth replaced by the appearance of a woman in her 50s by human standards. She had traded eternity for a mortal lifespan, but as she looked at Kate alive and whole beside her, she felt no regret. She had existed for 300 years without truly living. Now she would live for perhaps another 300, and every moment would matter in a way it never had before. Night Whisper spread his wings and carried them away from the collapsing nexus. His body bore new scars from the ordeal, and his consciousness was forever changed by being split between 2 bonded partners, but he felt more complete than he ever had before, as if this was what he had been waiting for his entire long life. They fled through the debris field as the nexus came apart behind them. The massive structure broke into millions of pieces that scattered across the dead zone like seeds. The swarm organisms that had survived the transformation were already beginning to establish new patterns. Some guarded the dead worlds, as if standing vigil for the civilizations that had been lost. Others began the slow work of ecological restoration, using their ability to manipulate biological matter to bring life back to barren planets. As they escaped the forbidden zone and returned to known space, they began to see the effects of what they had done. The galactic war that had raged for 10,000 years was over within days. The swarm had either transformed into protectors or destroyed itself. Trying to resist, reports flooded in from across the galaxy of swarm fleets that now defended vulnerable worlds instead of attacking them. But not everything was positive. The political fallout was immediate and severe. The Sylvari government declared Lyraeus a traitor and an exile who would be executed if she ever returned to their territory. They refused to acknowledge the truth about the swarm origins and instead claimed that the princess had been compromised by human biological weapons. The official story was that Kate had somehow corrupted both Lyraeus and her dragon with alien mind control. The human colonial fleet had its own reaction. When they finally re-established contact with Earth, they found the planet alive, but contained within a massive swarm construct. The pre-transformation. Swarm had built a protective shell around humanity home world, not to destroy it, but to preserve it. The original programming contradiction had caused the swarm to quarantine Earth rather than consume it. The planet and its population had been in stasis for 6 months, completely unaware of the war raging outside. Kate's request to return to active duty was denied. The colonial military declared her legally dead and classified everything about the neural implant program. The other volunteers who had died were erased from official records, and the Sylvari ruins on the colony world were sealed off. Earth government did not want to admit that they had experimented with alien technology in ways that violated multiple treaties. So Kate and Lyraeus and Night Whisper became wanderers without a home or a people to claim them. They were the first true triple-bonded beings in galactic history, and neither the Sylvari nor the humans knew what to do with them. Most civilizations treated them with suspicion or fear, as living reminders of the war and the uncomfortable truths that had been revealed. They traveled from world to world, helping where they could and learning to live with their new reality. Kate missed Earth, desperately, but she knew she could never truly go home again. She was too changed, too, other to fit back into the life she had left behind. Lyraeus grieved for the immortality she had given up, but found joy in the simple fact of feeling things deeply. For the first time in centuries, Night Whisper was content in a way he had never been before, finally complete with two bonded partners who needed him equally. Months passed as they wandered. Eventually, their travels brought them back to Earth. The protective swarm shell had been removed, and the planet was reconnecting with its colonies. Kate stood on the surface, breathing in the familiar air and feeling warm sunlight on her face. For the first time since the neural implants had been installed, she felt something close to peace. Lyraeus stood beside her, holding her hand as they looked out over a landscape of green hills and blue sky. The former princess marveled at how beautiful it all was. She had seen thousands of worlds in her long life, but none of them had felt as alive as this one. Perhaps it was because she was mortal now and could appreciate the temporary nature of beauty. Perhaps it was because she was seeing it through Kate, memories and emotions. Perhaps it was simply because she was happy. Night Whisper landed beside them, folding his wings and settling onto the grass with a satisfied rumble. The dragon was larger than any earth animal, but somehow he did not seem out of place here. He belonged because his bonded partners belonged, and they were inseparable now. Kate turned to Lyraeus with tears in her eyes and thanked her once again for giving up eternity to save her life. The princess smiled and wiped away the tears gently. She explained that Lyraeus had not given up eternity for existence. She had traded existence for life, and there was a profound difference between the two. It had taken a human to teach her that lesson. For 300 years, the princess had sat on her throne watching her world with cold detachment, never allowing herself to feel or want or need anything beyond duty. She had been immortal, but not truly alive. She had existed without living. Now she was mortal, and every moment mattered. Every sunrise was precious because there would only be a finite number of them. Every touch of Kate's hand sent electricity through her because she knew their time together would end eventually. Every shared thought with Night Whisper was a gift because nothing lasted forever. Kate understood what Lyraeus was trying to say. She pulled the former princess close and kissed her gently. The triple bond let them feel each other's emotions without barriers. The love and gratitude and wonder flowing between them was almost overwhelming. Night Whisper rumbled his approval and wrapped his tail around both of them in a draconic embrace. They stood there together on the grass under the warm sun, and for the first time since the journey began, they were not running or fighting or dying. They were simply being three souls woven together into something that had never existed before. A human who carried dragon fire and silvery grace. A princess who had chosen mortality over empty immortality. A dragon who loved two partners equally without reservation. The galaxy would remember them as the ones who ended the 10,000-year war. The historians would debate whether they were heroes or traitors or something in between. The Sylvari would curse Lyraeus' name for revealing their ancestors. Shame. The humans would classify Kate File and pretend she never existed. But none of that mattered to the three of them. They had each other, and they had time. Not eternity, but enough. For Kate, it meant centuries, instead of the few years she would have had as a normal human. For Lyraeus, it meant learning to value each moment instead of taking existence for granted. For Night Whisper, it meant having companions who would live long enough to truly know him. The princess had forgotten her throne the moment the human soldier had crashed through the palace shields covered in blood and impossible determination. By the end of everything, she had remembered what it meant to be alive. She had learned that some things were worth more than crowns or immortality or the approval of her people. As they walked together across the earth grass with Night Whisper following behind them, the three bonded souls knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. One being with three perspectives, one consciousness, with three voices, one love that transcended the boundaries of species and mortality. The war was over. The lies had been exposed. The swarm had been freed from its paradox, and three impossible beings had found each other in the darkness and chosen to become something new that was enough.